You are listening to Red Team Radio.
This is part 2 with Joe of Bishop Fox. If you have not seen part 1, please click the link at the top of the video.
What's your favorite technology then? To break in your favorite weird technology.
Favorite weird.
Besides the mainframe.
I
know, hard question on the spot. Sorry.
We also, I'm trying to think, we ran into, we did some work with, I need to be careful about what I say here.
Yeah.
We've done work with software that was pirated for industrial equipment. And we had to reverse engineer and figure out how they were cracking this software. And that was really fun because the industrial equipment was kind of weird and fun to work on. And then also it's reverse engineering cracked software is kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that was pretty fun. Although it was all JavaScript. It was
one of your favorite languages.
Oh God, I hate JavaScript. I mean, I'm very competent JavaScript programmer.
Yes.
Or at least I think I am.
No, you are.
But it's hard to think of a more horrible language. I do that. TypeScript makes it a bit more palatable. I've been anything I do today is probably going to be TypeScript, but which is one of Microsoft's great products is TypeScript. So credit where credit's due. But that was pretty fun, and it was using weird embedded JavaScript interpreters, and so that was kind of fun to figure all that stuff out. So,
and you guys figured it out, and they were able to fix it.
Yeah, well, we figured out how they were cracking the software, and we were like, well, DRM is basically an impossible problem, so they're probably gonna, even if you do all this stuff, they're probably still gonna crack it. But
just raises the bar.
It makes it a little harder. But again, obfuscation is actually a really hard problem.
Going back to it, right? Yeah, exactly.
Which honestly, some of the best techniques for packing, exploit payloads or backdoor payloads and C2s and stuff are from the video game industry. Video game protection software is actually crazy packer, anti-debug, all this crazy stuff. So it's fun. It's always fun to read about that because even certain red teaming techniques, a lot of them come from hacking video games and bypassing detections in video games. So that's always fun to see as well, and really, really cool stuff to see. I've even seen I feel like certain, maybe this isn't true. I don't have anything to back it up, but I've seen certain community, because one of the other things I love is there's a YouTube channel called Retro Gaming Explained, something like that.
Oh yeah, I've seen this YouTube channel. Yeah.
And he goes through all the old Super Nintendo architectures and stuff, and he explains the different glitches in these old games. Mm-hmm. And glitches are basically exploits. Yeah. They're basically bugs in the code that you exploit. So a lot of the techniques we use are based on stuff developed there, but really great channel, and he has a great video on the Mario wrong warp exploit where you're creating shellcode using sprites and stuff and then jumping to it.
He also has some cool stuff on the hardware protections. That are used in the older Nintendo systems, Dreamcast and stuff like that as well. So.
Either way, I forgot how we got on this topic, so I don't
know.
It's fine. Not sure how to conclude here. But
we'll just do a hard transition out. No,
okay,
it's totally fine. It's totally fine. This is what happens when you don't have a
trying to think
scripted.
Back to what my
what was
point
the original
was.
point?
Yeah.
That happens. So on red teaming, right? So Bishop Fox has a red team.
Yep.
Now you've had it for 5 years?
4, I think.
4?
We were kind of late to the game, to be honest.
You said it, I didn't.
Yeah. I mean, we did red teams before that. We just didn't have a dedicated team doing it.
Right.
And that, I think, was just very limiting in a number of different ways. So, about 4 years ago, we're going to make this its own thing. And that way we can do it, properly. So.
And then when there's contracts that call out for a red team, you can be like, we got one now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we would always be like, oh yeah, we have a red team, which we have. Even then we had a lot of really talented consultants.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we sold Red Teams, you're still getting like really talented consultants.
Yeah, definitely.
But it just wasn't a dedicated business unit, you know. So we've been doing offensive securities long before that.
Yeah. Before you had, you did even before you had your official Red Team, you all would do physicals, stuff like that. I know because
you were on them. Yeah, you worked at Bishop Fox for a while.
You got me my job at Bishop Fox.
So we kind of did all of the individual pieces, but it just wasn't like its own service line. Yeah. And so about 4 years ago, we're like, there's definitely enough demand for this, and we feel like we want to dedicate resources to it. So we've been doing that for about 4 years, which was great timing because like the first 10 years of my career, I did application security, and then helped start the Red Team. So prior to helping start the Red Team, I was mostly all software. Software stuff, which I think has actually given me some different perspectives on red teaming as well. Like a lot of people in the red teaming space, I feel like their background's more in like the network penetration testing stuff.
It definitely is. Yeah.
So I think, but I feel like being able, like really understanding code and being able to write code has been a really valuable skill.
I think it's one of the most important skills a red teamer has to have, and like a lot of people don't like to hear that, right? Yeah. And it's why I've had to get better at programming because I was dog shit in the beginning, like absolute trash.
I remember.
Yeah, it was like I could find exploits because I was like, that looks like something I would write. All right.
Yeah. Like, this can't be good.
This is not good. But I'm not saying it's not terrible still. Yeah. But definitely like learning how to code, understanding code made me a way better exploiter, and being able to like really monetize on that.
Well, especially when it comes again to the things I like, which is like these hipster technologies. There's often like not a tool that exists,
right?
And there's nothing you can go buy, And so your only option at that point is to create something yourself,
right?
So that's been super useful. And it's definitely something we look for in our red teamers. It's like, can you actually write code to a reasonable? You don't have to be a developer, you don't have to be an expert, but you have to be able to write at least a little bit of code.
And you have to understand it.
Yeah.
And because sometimes they're gonna like you'll get access to source or something like that, and you need to be able to use that to your advantage.
Or you need a backdoor source code.
Right.
Another, I think, kind of actual tricky skill, like knowing how to properly backdoor code. Like, obviously, you can just put, like, a shell exec into some... But, like, that's... Or, base 64 something and eval it or so,
That's lame. And that's going to get caught.
It's probably going to get caught. Although, I'm continually surprised by what gets through human reviews, human code reviews and stuff. Especially if, you can put it...
just use AI now, right?
Yeah, I guess you could, maybe. Although, because, also, like, backdooring unit tests is great because it runs on the developers' machines, but, and nobody's looking at unit test code. But anyways, knowing clever ways to backdoor, like, logic and stuff within the code is I think, which you get into on red teams often. Because you'll get commit access to, like, a Git repo, but you won't necessarily have code execution or something like that.
Right.
And that happens, I think, a lot with containers as well. Or you'll get, Jenkins is like one of the more, you love to see Jenkins on a red team because you're like, well, yeah, we're getting in. So in situations like that, you might have to backdoor containers. So it's important to know how containers are built and deployed. And that kind of requires at least a little bit of programming. So I think that's been great. And I think, again, not something... something people don't often like to hear. It's like, no, you're probably going to have to learn how to write code.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what, we have a lot of people like, oh yeah, like they love the physical side of red teaming. I'm just like, right. But you understand that's like one component of red teaming. Yeah. Right. And you're not always able to do that on an engagement, right? Like you can't always physically break into a place. Sometimes they're just going to drop you into the network because they don't have budget to do an entire full red team engagement, right? They have the budget to do a particular, red cell or pen test on a particular item. So if you can learn that as well, that's going to really increase your marketability.
I think the other thing there too is like when you look at real world threat activity, not that there isn't examples of people physically breaking into buildings. There's plenty, but the vast majority of it is stuff out of other countries where they're not subject to your jurisdiction,
Right.
they don't want to be subject to your jurisdiction, and they're trying to do it all remotely.
Yeah.
Again, there's a lot of examples of people, like I think one of my favorites is, you know about the Xbox One that got like sold on eBay before the Xbox One came out?
I did not know.
So there was like a prototype Xbox One that popped up on eBay like 6 months before the Xbox One came out. And what had happened is, and I think this was on Darknet Diaries or something, but some Microsoft engineer's like stepson stole his badge, walked into Microsoft, and then walked out with the prototypes and shipped them to some guy in Australia.
So I did hear that, right? But I did not hear that it was sold on eBay.
So yeah, there's a ton of high profile examples of,
or like this one of the Sony hacks, right?
Yeah,
involved in physical. A lot of times it involves abusing credentials that are given to employees, though, right?
Right.
So like insider threat, and that's what I try to like push a lot of people to is like, it doesn't need to necessarily be an external threat actor that's trying to break in. It could be they have compromised somehow one of your employees, or one of your employees are compromised. So,
but when you take all of that and you compare it to the number of times companies get owned because Susan in accounting or
installed ransomware,
like executed a Word document macro, or Tom in the account manager or sales rep, downloaded the wrong thing and ran it, like that's, I would guess, multiple orders of magnitude more threat activity over there.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
So clients are aware of that. Again, it depends on the organization.
Right.
But I think that's also why you just don't see as big of a market for that stuff. Is like,
usually if there's like a physical place, like a data center, or if the company deals with a physical product, they're more interested on like the physical side of items.
Absolutely.
And then if they're just like let's say a high-tech startup, right? Because you work with a lot of those, right? They're like,
we work with a lot of startups and tech companies.
All our employees are remote. We don't really have like a central base where everything is there.
Even if they do, no one's coming in.
Right. And then all our stuff is ran on AWS or something else, right? So like, Amazon will do a lot of like physical stuff. They're really interested in that type of work. But, the high-tech startup is not going to be interested in that necessarily, right? And as we joked about beforehand, like, we're not wanting to break into employees' houses.
Yeah,
right?
Like you're not going to, they're working remote, you're not breaking in.
Right,
So, and I think one of the other things that's affected this is AWS and GCP and Azure, right? Like, mid-sized companies don't have their own data centers anymore.
No.
So, like, and
they've all offloaded that responsibility onto someone else.
And then Amazon will probably have pretty good physical security already because, like as you said, they have a data center. They have the data centers and stuff.
No comment. But just kidding. They but that's what I find a lot of times is, a lot of people when they hear red teaming, they think like physical only. I'm just like, but that's not it. Like there's so much more. Like gaining access inside a building, it's just the first step so that we can gain further access. So we don't have to go and, either have an O day on something on the external side. Because a lot of companies they'll spend, and companies have gotten way better about this, but they usually spend the majority on their external defenses.
Yep.
Right.
Perimeter security is definitely improved.
Right. And then they won't spend as much money inside. Now that has improved significantly as well. Right. So if we're talking about, pen testing internally at 2010, 2011, like it was pretty much a lot of places were very, very open once you were able to get past their perimeter. Yeah. Right. But now even companies are harder to get into once you even pass that perimeter.
I've seen less movement in that space, to be honest. Like it does feel like it's getting better, but mostly just because Active Directory is dying a slow and painful death. I'm not sure if it's like people are actually configuring things better.
Okay.
Patching has definitely gotten better because most stuff automatically updates now.
Yep.
Not everything, but a lot of stuff. And so internally, systems are getting patched faster or patched at all. So like that's getting better, but I don't know. We still see a lot of flat networks with like...
Yeah, I see it on like larger organizations, but we have organizations that are larger that are like, they've adopted like the Beyond Corp type
the
model.
Zero Trust. It's
Zero
very
Trust
hip.
Stuff. I know, it is. Everyone wants to be Zero Trust. There's some places where they're like, we're Zero Trust. And I was just like...
So what do you mean by Zero Trust? And they're like, zero trust.
Yeah. Like when your lead engineer can't explain.
Yeah, you're like on a technical level. What do you mean by that?
Right? Yeah.
Like zero trust.
Yeah. There's definitely been some tests where we've been on, and they're like, yeah, we're a zero trust environment. And I was just like, maybe you're like a deny lots of things environment, but you're not a zero trust.
Yeah.
Like it's very hard to actually build those environments and maintain those environments.
Yeah.
It's actually the maintaining part that becomes difficult on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of configuration overhead.
Yeah. And that's what people forget is like the administrative side of that is very difficult and very costly. Mm-hmm. So then they start like actually doing zero trust stuff, and they're like, we don't like this anymore.
Yeah, they're like, wait, this is a lot of work.
This is costing us a lot of money.
Yeah.
So they're like, yeah, it's so I have had the pleasure of having clients that are actually legitimately moving over to zero trust. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's why my view is a little skewed, right? Because a lot of them are actually legitimately trying to do that and lock down that internal side. But some of these clients are the ones that are much more mature in their security journey. Mm-hmm. And I would say they are, I would say I actually do have some clients that legitimately, outside of like critical infrastructure, because they need to worry about state actors as well. I'm talking about private non-critical infrastructure companies that legitimately have to worry about state actors affecting their business operations on day to day, right? And this is like logistics companies and stuff like that. And that's the other thing. Logistics companies, they really want you to test a lot of physical items.
Yep.
But they're taking a lot of good steps on the inside of their network as well. Then there's always the human aspect, right? And that seems to never get patched.
There's no patch.
Yeah.
Other than the only option is to not let people. I mean, I think this is honestly one of the reasons why Chromebooks are a secure platform. Is it doesn't matter if the user tries to download and run something, it's not going to work. Like it's just not an option because there's no file system, there's no apps. Like you just can't. Like if it's not an option, then they can't do it.
Well, and I think security control should not be reliant. Like everyone says, our employees are the first line of defense. I'm like, but they shouldn't be the first line of defense.
The number one adage, and I tell my team this a lot too, is like any system that relies on human reliability is unreliable.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Any security control that relies on a human is a bad one. So like we encounter this with like phishing. It's very tempting when you successfully like phish and you go to write the report to write like a insufficient employee training or insufficient security awareness in your report. Personally, I don't think that's a good recommendation because you're never going to teach people to like, I can't parse a URL accurately in my head. So you're definitely not going to teach, non-technical people to do it. Because there's a lot of nuance to the ways URL, and I guarantee even technical people will get it wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So there's actually another great book is The Tangled Web.
Oh,
and
yes.
the first or second chapter covers the structure of URLs, and he even gives an example of a URL that if you open it in Firefox and Chrome, will go to a different endpoint. Mm-hmm. So unless you know the user agent in which you're opening the URL, in certain situations, it's not possible to correctly parse it in your head because it's completely dependent on the user agent. But anyways, so we try to make recommendations around like U2F, which is universal second factor or like FIDO2 based authentication, because the human can't get it wrong. It doesn't matter if you set up a phishing site with FIDO, and it doesn't, even if you get the user to click on the link, and even if you get the user to go to the website, and even if you get the user to click on the authenticator, that credential won't work. Right. So the human, like the user, it's a very safe technology, right? So we also make a distinction between like safe technologies and secure technologies. Mm-hmm. Like a secure technology is anything that can actually be, in theory, secure. So like GPG, for example, in theory, you can use GPG securely. It's not particularly easy to use securely, but you can do it. Whereas like safe technologies are ones that are very difficult to use incorrectly or insecurely, right? Yep. So like FIDO2 and U2F and passkeys being a very recent example of that, are just much, much better options to address phishing, at least credential phishing, I should say.
Right.
Because the human can't get it wrong. Because it won't let them.
Well, and if you do a social engineering project or that's part of a red team engagement that you're doing, what I try to tell everyone that's writing a report for us is there has to be technical controls in place. Like if you say, like you can say insufficient training, sure, whatever. But like your recommendation is a technical control to fix this problem, not you need to do better training with your employees.
Because they're not going to pay attention.
No.
I don't pay attention during security trainings either.
No,
So
yeah.
like I get, like
yeah. When you like go through your little, it's October cybersecurity month, right? And it's just like watch the 30-minute video, and it's just like
no, that's not.
Why am I doing this?
And it's not that you shouldn't give your employees anything, but
No,
it needs to
no.
be very like short and practical things,
Right.
not
Yeah.
this is how to parse a URL to determine whether or not you're going to like a Russian website that might be phishing. Like it's never going to work.
Yeah. The when we do like a security awareness thing, which we don't recommend companies generally go through us with that because it's very expensive. I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
What we do is kind of like a road show of like very easily accessible attacks that are very visual, or we'll add visual components to it. And
Stunt hacking.
Yeah, exactly.
I think is what it's called. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. No, exactly. Right. And I absolutely dislike it.
Yeah.
But for like the non, the person who's going to lose engagement very quickly, they keep engaged for it. And you're like, okay, I hope just within this time that you capture like one or two nuggets of things. I don't expect you to memorize everything in this 30-minute, roadshow thing that we do. So, but outside of that, it's like the trainings are like, make sure you don't click on URLs that you don't know. And it's just like, well, it says the company name. Like,
like I know it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what I don't like is exactly what you're saying is those recommendations that are like, it's like you can say they need better training, but also provide a technical control that can help with things.
Yeah, and I think, you always will probably end up having to use a combination of both because it can be difficult to deploy some of these newer technologies.
Oh, yeah.
I do think...
And costly for some places as well.
Well,
right?
that's why passkeys are great, right? Is especially a lot of SSO providers have started supporting passkeys. Yeah. So you can realistically implement some of this stuff, and you don't have to buy, 1,000 YubiKeys for everyone in your company in order to do it anymore.
But I like my YubiKeys.
I mean, I love YubiKeys too. I still use mine, but that hardware requirement can be a significant barrier to entry for certain companies.
Definitely.
Whereas like passkeys, as long as you have some type of password manager, which hopefully you're providing your employees already, it probably supports that. And then if you can just get the majority, you don't have to get everything, but if you can get like the majority of your stuff onto SSO, that's a very difficult target at that point. Like again, at least for credential phishing, we're probably going to have to execute code now on targets in order to bypass all that stuff. And executing code on targets exposes you to EDR and all sorts of other telemetry and really increases the risk of being detected for the attacker. So I actually think that's the best part of like passkeys and U2F and everything is it actually makes your EDR more effective because you have to run code on the endpoint now in order to bypass it.
Yeah, and that and that's part of the I think EDR detection systems and all those other items, all these other telemetries that we take advantage of, I think teams are deploying those more and more as well.
Oh, yeah. It's pretty rare we go in and don't see at least some type of EDR. Not all of them are great.
Yeah.
Most of the big ones are fine if you configure them. I mean, the biggest mistake people make is they buy it and then plug it in or install it, and they're like, oh, we're good now, right?
Yeah.
And they don't have a team managing it or looking at it. And it's like, well... That's not exactly how that works, but these products are very effective when you tune them and you have a team managing them, and So
that just reminded me. I remember we're doing a red team engagement for a new client, and usually we don't like to just jump into a full red team engagement with a new client. We want to understand a little bit of their capabilities and stuff like that, and what they actually need, because not a lot of companies just need to jump straight into like a full spectrum.
You probably shouldn't even. You got to walk before you run.
And but they swore to us that they were ready.
Okay.
And I think it was like day 2 of a 2-week project, and I called my point of contact and I said, "You guys are not ready." And they're like, "Okay, so what'd you do?" I was like, "We have everything now. Like day 2 of this like 14-day project, we have everything. You're not ready. So what I recommend is that we change the project focus right now. You don't have us keep on doing this. Let's change the project focus, okay? And let's actually get you guys like on the path to your security journey that is going to be effective. Because if you want us to keep on just exploring around, right, then like you're going to be wasting money that you can spend more effectively. And that's what I want to like really convey with clients is like there's better ways to spend money on different projects, right?
Yeah.
And something might sound hip and cool right now. Right now it's like red teams. Everyone wants to do red teams. Beforehand, it was like companies would want other companies to write signatures for them and stuff like that. And there's going to be, I don't know what the next thing's going to be that everyone wants people to do. But it's just like there are better ways. Not every company is ready for this type of engagement. Even doing like a walkthrough if they want to do something on the physical side. Or
honestly, feel like that's even the biggest ROI. A lot of the time is the walkthrough.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Or if they want us to like look at your network, it's like, okay, well let's do. There's more than just like dropping us on a network or having us try to break into your internal network that we can do that would return a better investment.
Yeah.
If you're not ready for that type of thing, right?
I do think there's an interesting exception to that we've run into before, where a new CISO comes in, and for political reasons, he wants to make his predecessor look bad, and also wants a bigger budget.
I don't understand.
So he's like, we really need a red team that just wrecks everything.
Yeah. No, yes, we definitely have ran into that beforehand as well. And I don't necessarily like those type of projects because I'm just like...
punching kittens can be fun, but it's not, it's not the most productive use of time either. So
we're going to go clubbing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, that is actually, that brings up a great point. When a new CISO comes in, they'll usually want something like that. And I don't understand that mindset as like,
I have seen it lead to bigger budgets, though.
Yeah, but I think there's different ways you can lead to a bigger budget.
Yeah,
like I think there's a more effective way that can lead to a bigger budget.
It's probably a good point.
So then what I call that digital murking, right? Where it's just like we're coming in as we're like the hitmen.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
We're the digital Blackwater now.
Yeah,
that's coming in, and we're eliminating this village.
Yeah,
to put it nicely, right? It's just like.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a nice way to put it, to be honest, but I understand your point.
No, I was saying a nice way to put what was actually happening is eliminating the village, right?
Yeah. I'm still not sure doesn't seem like a nice way to put it.
But yeah, I think there are different routes that new CISOs can take that would allow them to expand their budget that doesn't require that type of like digital murking itself. And I think...
Because I do think it can be demoralizing to a company to get reports like that too, where it's just like everything's broken.
But it's not just demoralizing to upper management; it's demoralizing to like engineers and stuff like that.
Absolutely,
because you don't know the prior restrictions that they had, you don't know the political or operating environment that they had to work into. If you want to come in as a CISO, you don't want to like just kill your team.
Yeah.
Right. Unless I know there are some CISOs that then what they want to do is they want people to like leave so they can bring on their own players, right?
But, and then that seems a little toxic.
Yeah, again, that's not the route and it's not really the type of client that we wanted to be dealing with. But yeah, we definitely have like came in where it's like a new CISO and they want to see something happen. To that, I'm like, I think there are better ways that we can expand your budget, more reasonable ways to get an even bigger budget than digital murking itself. Yeah. Right.
I would say yes, but I'll still cash your check.
Oh yeah. I understand.
I can't convince you.
Right? Yeah. We unless the one thing that we do have a hard stop on is if they want to fire people that we social engineer.
Oh yeah, we don't even put names in reports actually.
So. We will tell the employees, we will say the employees, but we have a legal agreement that says you will not retaliate against these employees unless there is an exception. Upper management and executives are in scope and they suffer the same consequences.
That seems fair.
No one agrees to that. They're like, okay, well, we're not going to fire people. Yeah.
We did do a great project with a company where we did successfully phish an executive. And like I said, we don't put names in reports because we don't want clients to retaliate. And it's not productive. Also, we view it as more of technical control failures than
a personnel.
Going back again, you'll never teach people to parse URLs in their heads. But during the outbrief, he actually volunteered that he was one of the people, and I think it was actually it led to a very productive conversation in the outbrief. Because he was like, "Yep, it was me. Like the person in this report is me." And
I don't think I've ever ran into an executive that had done that we social engineered successfully that had like volunteered to do that. So that's super awesome to hear.
So the good things are out there. But I would say that was a notable exception to other types of social engineering engagements we've done.
So. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now on the going to like the physical side, you've been on some physical engagements now, right? Do you like them?
I don't mind them. I would say it's not my. I do think they can be fun.
You don't like them when they're hot.
Yes, I did one in the Phoenix metro area in the middle of the summer. And long story short, it involved us walking like a half mile through the desert, which was not honestly, I think we might have been close to heat strokes at the end. And there were also armed guards, which always makes me nervous. We take a lot of precautions, but anytime firearms are involved, like, that can be a little stressful, at least for me. But they're definitely fun, very interesting. I always love the combination of physical and technical things.
Yeah.
Especially like on that engagement as well, we were like trying to drop, like a Raspberry Pi onto the internal network. And when we got in, we realized that we couldn't tunnel out of the corporate network because of some proxying issue. There's a corporate proxy or something. We couldn't really figure it out while we were there because we were just trying to plug in the Ethernet and leave. But we could see the callbacks on our phone to figure out if it was like calling back properly, and it wasn't. So, but we hadn't brought a monitor and keyboard with us because, we're breaking in somewhere. But it just so happened that IT was in the same building as us. So we walked over towards the IT team. And this was, shortly after COVID. So the office was mostly empty. And there was a bunch of extra monitors and keyboards. So we plugged in there and we started debugging stuff. And then eventually we just bridged it to the guest Wi-Fi network and then plugged it in the corporate network. And we're like, well, we don't need to get out through the corporate proxy because we can just do an internal pen test from the guest Wi-Fi now. So, so stuff like that was fun. My team also recently did one in San Francisco where they were it was like the day before even. I don't even think it was during the engagement, but they were just walking past, kind of doing some initial recon.
Yep.
Just not trying to get in. They're just...
Casing the joint.
Casing the joint, exactly. They were casing the joint. And they saw someone bring some trash cans outside to the curb to throw away stuff. And so we like text the client. We're like, it's fine if we like, grab some stuff out of there just to like see what's interesting. And I've dumpster dived on several physicals and never gotten anything good. Okay, I'll preface it. And this is my team working on this project. And so they just grabbed some stuff out and went back to the hotel and started looking through it. And the CEO's W-2s were in the trash. I have to assume is not an everyday occurrence.
No.
So they just got like, and there's a bunch of other interesting stuff in there too, but it was the most insane thing I've ever seen, where it's just like the one day that happened to be walking by, and it happened to be at the time they were putting the trash out there, and it happened to be the day like his secretary or he was like done with his taxes and threw it out without shredding it.
Yeah.
And we just happened to grab that, like the stars truly aligned.
Right.
So that was really cool to see. So that was another really cool project. Also, one of the guys on my team has an RFID tag embedded in his hand.
Yeah, I can't do that.
And he programmed the client's badge into his hand so he could just walk up and get in that way, which was also a very memorable project. But yeah, physicals are super interesting. I just tend to love code and like the nerdier. It's sort of the more software aspects, but I do enjoy, especially the everything uses RFID now, which is like a kind of an interesting space. Most RFID systems aren't very secure, and so that can be a lot of fun too. Is like breaking the RFID and figuring out what standard it is, and then trying. do we need to use an ESP key? Can we clone it? Kind of going through that can be a lot of fun. Although we did another one in Minnesota during the winter, and we had to install an ESP key, which, is not the most intricate wiring, but, you got to take the panel off and you got to do it, and it's like -20 outside. And so, again, I was lookout on this one. So I was on the project, but I was lookout for my other coworker, and he was like trying to install it, and his hands are like shaking, and he could barely get it done. But, so my advice to people getting into physicals is really consider the weather conditions before committing to a project.
Yeah.
Also, it's really hard to like tailgate people when it's -20. Like, you do not want to be standing outside waiting for people to come to the office, especially, again, not a lot of people in office these days. You might be standing out there for a really long time.
Yeah.
So, consider the weather conditions before a physical engagement.
Yeah, no, definitely have done the, it's been 115 degrees and out in the summer. And it's terrible. What was terrible is there was no getting inside the place, because the place that we were getting inside from is also outside. Like, we're getting through a gate system, right? And then they had boxes that you didn't walk into. Like, you're just breaking into these boxes that are outside. And then, also, maybe it's TMI. When you're on a red team engagement, you're there to break in, and then you have to break in on the digital side and stuff like that. And you're in the middle of the desert. Sometimes there's only porta potties out there, and now you are suffering having to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
wearing, because in some of these places, like in this particular situation, I was having to wear like Cat 2 or Cat 3 rated, fireproof rated clothing. You have your hard hat, you have a vest on top of that as well. You have these boots. These pants are super heavy that you're wearing because they're fire resistant, right? And you're just dying. And you're like, what am I doing here? And if there's ever, and this is the thing, like with members that I work with on my team, if there's any extreme weather conditions, I will also be out there with them.
Just suffering.
Yep. So they don't just feel like I just am putting them out there to not suffer. So done the -6 degrees Fahrenheit type stuff too.
I do think that's
also
important.
Like
you shouldn't be asking your team to do things you're not willing to do yourself.
Yeah. So, and there's some folks that I work with, like Jason and whatnot. He's a contractor that I work with, very capable in the physical space. But when we have to like suffer, he's there willing to suffer with me. But he knows that I'll be out there with him. And whether it's -6 degrees Fahrenheit or it's 115 degrees, 120 degrees, and some hellhole that it feels like a hellhole at that time. Also, when you grab a lock, if they're like some of these facilities, you can bypass the RFID stuff. But they want to see like other ways to get in. So then like they have padlocks on there, and you actually have to pick the padlock. When you grab a padlock and it's 115 degrees outside, remember that the padlock's going to be really hot, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's also not fun.
Be careful. Yeah, bring some gloves.
Yeah. So definitely have made that mistake before, right? Also, your skin can stick to stuff that's really cold. Yeah. I learned that. Being, from the deserts, I did not know that. I experienced that a few years ago.
Having grown up in Minneapolis, I definitely knew that one.
I did not know that one. So that was awkward to have to be like, okay, now I have to get like some warm water to pour on this. Yeah. But how do you do that when it's just you?
Also,
right?
That can also freeze. You better
depending
get
on the
quick.
temperature.
You better get up. Because a classic mistake some people make, they'll pour like hot water on their windshield to try to melt the ice, and that's not a good idea. Do not do that.
Yeah, no. I have actually learned that the hard way as well. Because again, being from the desert, I did not, and this is actually the same engagement, right? So I wouldn't say it was hot water. I would say it was like very warm water, maybe. And it
The
did not.
difference in temperature.
It did not make it did not fix my problem. It made it worse.
Definitely will.
So
you can also crack the windshield.
Can you?
Oh, definitely.
Oh, snap. Okay, I didn't even know that part.
Oh, for sure.
I know you can crack the windshield in the desert if it's super hot and you like blast your AC. I know that can.
Oh, really?
That can cause some problems depending on on older vehicles. That will like crack windshields. So, I didn't even. But yeah, I learned that the hard way. I don't do well in snow.
Yeah.
Okay. I was not meant to be in snow. I feel like so. But yeah, definitely you can get your hands stuck to things, which was a new experience for me. Luckily, I had someone with me who was used to that type of environment. So they were able to come up with solutions very quickly.
You.
Yeah.
All your winterizing tips here on Red Team Radio.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We but I mean, even like in the courses that we teach, we used to teach like our surveillance course during the hot summers and during cold winters. We had a lot of students complain about that. So we try to do it like more tempered temperatures now. But it was really good because the students were able to like see like if you're trying to, zoom in onto a key that's a quarter mile away, to get a picture of it, that your focus changes every few minutes on your camera, right? Because your metal is contracting, right? The different materials contract and expand at different rates, so it can mess with your image quality. If it's really hot, you have the mirage effect that you have to deal with, right? As well as the focusing problem. Your equipment's going to fail. We had a student and their camera overheated during the summer, and they're like, "Oh snap!" Like I actually
there's a computer in here.
And people forget about those things, right? And when you're red teaming, if you don't take weather into consideration, you can also forget about that. But even more dangerous, like you were talking about, like the heat stroke stuff. Like there are red teamers that I know who have suffered from heat exhaustion because they were like not ready for it, right? They're working for a different company. One of the big fours, they were doing an engagement and they were not ready to do an engagement in the summertime.
Yeah.
They were out in Arizona doing it. And they actually they stopped the engagement and then they had to re-engage later.
Yeah. Because sometimes you're also physically exerting yourself as part of these engagements.
Right.
And that just exacerbates the whole weather, like especially in hot weather.
Right. Yeah. It becomes much harder to do. Yeah. Right. And us as nerds, we're
dripping
usually
sweat.
Right. Yeah. You just got to accept that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But like us as nerds, right? We're in air conditioning buildings, right? We can see the outside sometimes, if we're cool and stuff, and we have windows that look out. Sometimes we don't like that. But we lived in a very controlled environment, and then you leave that to do like physical red teaming, and you're like, oh snap, there are things I need to take into effect here, or things that you just forget that you have to do as red teamers. So,
yep. Lessons learned, let me tell you.
Yeah. I think everyone goes through that learning stage because even if no matter your training background and stuff like that, because I remember in training when I was getting all this training done, and I was going through it, they would tell us things like that, right? But until you actually experience it and you make the mistakes, you're like, oh yeah, okay. Like,
I think the saying is a smart man learns from his own mistakes, but a wise man learns from others' mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. So, right.
Yeah. So everyone knows where we fall in the spectrum.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, I wouldn't even consider myself a smart man. I would consider you actually one of the smarter, one of the smartest hackers I know. Like actual, I know you don't think that of yourself.
It's just time investment. You're confusing. You're confusing the insane amount of time I spend on this stuff.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no.
With intelligence.
I can sympathize with that. Yeah. I have the similar mindset when people are like, oh, yeah, you're really good at this. I'm like, I have sucked in so much, so thousands of hours into this.
Decades.
Yeah. But even at university, like right away, I remember, now our first conversation in university was about Magic the Gathering. But that's where the bonding moment happened.
That was the real bond.
But even through university, I mean, they're like probably the smartest hacker in our school at that time, I would think. So,
intelligence is a difficult thing to measure, I feel like, too. So it's like, I appreciate the compliment, but, like I work with a ton of super sharp people too. So maybe like I don't feel smart, but
I think imposter syndrome is real in our industry, right? But
I definitely know how much time I've spent like learning things, right? Mm-hmm. And it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like I think, especially I think a lot of juniors don't realize, like they'll look at people or look at what some people can do and they'll be like, oh, I'll never be able to do that. Or like, and it's like, no, you just have to spend literally 10 years learning it. And then you can definitely do it too. Yeah. I feel like a lot of a significant part of it is just time. And now it becomes easier to invest time when you enjoy doing it though.
Right.
So I think that's also kind of going back to something you mentioned earlier around having a passion for this sort of stuff.
Right. Instead of just pure monetary base.
Yeah. It's much easier to invest the insane amount of effort to learn these things if you enjoy doing it. In fact, if you don't enjoy doing it, you'll probably just give up.
Right.
So,
and you'll get burnt out super quickly.
Yeah. And I think people often confuse like, oh, he's so smart with like just like, no, he's just spent a ton of time, like an insane amount of time. It's not that you have to be a genius to do this stuff. You just have to invest the time to do it. So you can do it too if you invest the time.
Well, that's what I tell everyone. Yeah. I'm like, if I can do it, anyone can do it, right? Mm-hmm. All you have to do is be able to grind, right? Just grind to level 100. And then like you'll be able to do this as well.
Yeah.
And I think when I first jumped in as a researcher, I think that was very important to see, right? It's just like that grind. But definitely when I was young, I did not understand that grind.
Yeah. Especially with things like vulnerability research, I feel like, which I don't specifically do, but obviously having done application security and also applies to red teaming, you look for bugs and various stuff. So, the vast majority of code you look at is probably fine. Mm-hmm. Like you're gonna have to read through a lot of code before you find something interesting because most of it's just fine or not relevant. And so it can take a lot of patience and a lot of grind to especially I feel like that part of the industry. There's a lot of grind.
Well, and with vuln research, what you'll find is you'll find something interesting, but it's not relevant for like your end goal, right? Yep. So you'll find all these like little things, but it's like none of it matters. No one cares. No one wants to buy it, right? Yeah. And then you're just like, oh, well, that was cool.
I thought it was cool.
But it gives you what those things I found give you is that boost in I want to keep on going, right? So it's these little wins, even though it doesn't matter, it doesn't lead to a sell or it doesn't really affect your end goal. It does give you that moral yes, okay,
adrenaline
cool.
boost. Yeah. I feel like that's the same with when you first start learning to program. It's very important to have a short feedback loop. And this is why I think often people are like, oh, I'm going to go learn C or C++. And those languages, and Rust especially, it has a very long iteration cycle between you writing code, seeing it run and do something, and then changing that code. Right. Like that iteration loop, very long in those languages compared to something like Python. And even in Python, if you want to write a web application or something, like that iteration can also be kind of long.
Super long.
So I think it's good to have projects, but it's a similar thing where you have to see some progress. So it's important to choose projects where you have a shorter iteration loop when you're starting out.
Yeah.
And then once you become more experienced and you love the pain, then you can do these more sort of grand things. But it's just like any skill, you have to build it up over time. A lot of people just want to dive right in. Listen, I shove people into the deep end all the time. That's the way I teach. But, you're not going to climb Mount Everest, on day one. But I do push people into the deep end too. So, there's an appropriate amount of uncomfortableness you should be experiencing while learning as well. Like if you only do things you already know, you're also not pushing yourself. So there's a happy medium there, like a light drowning. Is that Is
that light waterboarding?
Yeah, you shouldn't drown. I don't want my team to drown when I'm teaching them things, but they might have the illusion that they're drowning at the time. So
those are some aggressive management techniques.
I just
wasn't like that when I was there.
Because I think people are often too trepidatious to take on new things. They're like, oh, I've never taken a training on this. I can't do it. And it's like, no, you probably can.
Yeah.
You probably can.
Yeah.
So, or just like like we were talking about earlier, especially in consulting, you have to learn a lot of different technologies.
Yeah.
And we'll put people on projects and they'll be, oh, I don't know if I can learn this. And it's like, well, you're going to try. Sorry.
Yep.
There's no one else.
Right.
Especially once you become like more senior in consulting, there literally is no one else. It's the senior, if the senior consultants can't do it, no one else is going to be able to do it either. So, the buck really starts to stop with you when it comes to these can we actually do this? But so I do believe in teaching through pushing people into the deep end, but at the same time, it's important to have that iteration cycle and choose sort of measured goals.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, and there are people that can do things and they just think they can't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's definitely been times where I've had them given like pep talks to people essentially like, no, you can do this, trust me. Like, I know you can do this. So, and then they go do it. Like, oh yeah, it was way easier.
Yeah,
it was way easier than I thought it was.
Yeah.
Right. Especially like a first physical or like a first social engineering engagement. You'll have that where it's just like, you have the knowledge. You can definitely do this.
I think the other thing I see in a lot of more junior people is they feel like especially when it comes to like programming or building things, they feel like they have to build something useful from the start.
Right.
Which you definitely don't.
Useful and perfect.
Yeah. It's like, no, I have abandoned way more projects than I've ever finished.
Right.
Not that anything is ever even really finished, but as long as you're learning something from a project, you don't even have to finish it. You don't have to get something useful out of it. What you got out of it was learning something.
Mm-hmm.
And that it has utility on its own, but you don't have to write a fully working like tool. Just try it out, see how far you get, and as long as you learn something, that's valuable. So.
Yeah, I mean, even with projects that you like, you can take like a side quest, and you're like, oh, I need to learn a little bit more about this, right? While you're developing a tool, so you just start digging around, and you have a whole bunch of quarter built or halfway built, experiments essentially.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, okay, now I have a better understanding of how this actually works. I can then make it actually work in my actual product.
And you might even go back and use some of that. Like I constantly find myself going back to abandoned projects and like copying code out of them and putting them into more useful things. So, it's surprising what you can apply in other places too. There's very few things I've learned about computing that I haven't been able to apply to red teaming. Like I was talking about earlier, hacking video games is like directly applicable to red teaming.
Right, yep.
But also like even understanding how to build computers and how performance works will help you with like password cracking. Yep. You understand how to build a faster password and like what makes a GPU fast. Those are skills you can use in password cracking in other places, or more recently with LLMs, because that's what everybody wants now.
Yep.
But that's all GPUs and memory and actually one of the realizations I had recently was MacBooks are really good for LLMs because they have unified memory.
Yeah.
The GPU has access to all of the memory on the device, so you can load really big models. So just having understandings like that, I think, it pops up in like super weird, unintuitive places. And so go learn I often feel like the security versions of things are sometimes the worst ways to learn things. Like if you want to learn cloud, I actually feel like going out and like reading a book on like how to hack cloud or taking a training right away may not be the best way to learn it.
Yeah.
Like you should go take a normal developer introduction to cloud and then take the hacking version, right?
Right.
And you'll get orders of magnitude more value out of it because you'll already understand all of the sort of like workings and you can talk the language. So never be afraid to like go out and like learn things that you think are unrelated to security because they'll probably come back and be related.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we teach an alarm class, right? Day one of the alarm class is learning how to be an alarm installer.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, because you have to know that. It's not just like, we're going to teach you how to bypass
And even
all
then,
these
you
things.
probably need some basic carpentry skills even.
You don't need carpentry skills.
Well, how do I find a live wire?
Yeah.
How do I not die installing this?
Yeah, how do I make sure I'm not dealing with,
live electrical wires?
Yeah.
That seems prudent.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people get really like antsy about dealing with like live systems as well. If they've never dealt with a live system before, like something with wires that could have some type of shock, right? It's not necessarily going to kill you. It's just not going to feel great.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can kill you though. So like don't.
No, and knowing that difference requires an understanding of electricity.
Yeah. So it's like,
so if you want to break alarms, the first thing you should learn is, electromagnetism.
The first thing you need to learn is how to strip wires properly, actually. Which surprisingly, actually, that's my number one thing I always find surprising is hackers not knowing how to strip wires.
Really?
Yes. I'm just like...
See, I should be thanking my dad for all the all of the forced home improvement projects I was, on as a child.
I actually literally have to have a section on like how to strip wire properly now. And I'm just like, okay, just strip these wires. And then I'd see like a bunch of students not doing anything. I'm like, you're already done?
Yeah.
Like, no, I don't know how to strip wire. I was like, okay.
It's not hard. New. Luckily, that's an easy one to learn.
That's right. That's right. But yeah, definitely. I mean, learning something from the, a developer standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Or learning something from a defensive standpoint, besides just jumping in straight to like, how do I break into this, right? Because it puts on blinders, especially like you can go back to the physical side. When you have all this knowledge about how to break into a building, right? And you just have these blinders, you forget that the little green LED on the RFID reader means it's open, right?
And the other thing is like, and we talked about this earlier, and what I enjoy is all the new stuff, right? There is no training. There is no book written about it. And in those situations, you just have to go and try to understand how it works.
Right.
Not how the documentation says it works, which is usually a half-truth at best. And not how the developer thinks it works, because that is also usually not entirely accurate. You have to figure out exactly, how it actually works. And when you do that, the security problems become self-evident.
Right.
Like you don't need a security training because you understand how it works. But in order to understand how it works, you really have to understand like all of these sort of like fundamental things that are on the surface level completely unrelated to security.
Right.
Yeah.
So. Well, and that's why like again when people are like, oh, how do I hack radios? And it's like we have so much to learn before we even get to that stage. Yeah, and that was a hard thing for me because that's what I wanted to do in the beginning, right? It's like, oh, how do I break this? And then I realized like, oh no, I have to learn how to become like an engineer before I can like be effective in breaking this stuff. And I think that is a loss, maybe a lost art on juniors and people new to red teaming and stuff like that.
Yeah, they always want like I feel like there's a tendency to always want to dive into like, oh, how's the security? How do I hack it?
Right.
And it's like, well, let's talk about general computer science, and then we'll get to that later.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think there's also like so never. I hope people don't feel hesitation when it's like or you're ever wasting time learning things that appear to be unrelated to security, because again, you'll be able to there's almost nothing I've learned about computers that I haven't been able to apply to red teaming in some way,
Yeah.
I've read books on like language design, like programming language design, and like how do you write an interpreter, and like that's actually been super useful in designing certain parts of Sliver and like understanding how lexical parsing works and like tokens and things like that. Again, these are things that are generally not super related to red teaming, but have been extremely valuable in wanting to build some of these more sophisticated pieces of tech. So.
Yeah, well, and again, it goes back to the being able to grind through things, right? Yeah. That you might not find extremely relevant or hopefully you find it a little interesting, but you may not find it interesting, but it is super useful. And even outside things like outside of technology, right? Learning about things outside of technology can be applicable to your job when you're doing security testing, right? Because then it'll give you the ability to think like how other people thought when it came to designing this, right? If you just have that technology side and you don't try to venture off into other parts of, the world, then you just get siloed into that, everything's always broken, and I always need to find that broken piece into it.
And I think a lot of times people also think there's like this direct path, like 1, 2, 3, like learn 1, 2, and 3, and then red teaming, right?
That's right.
And that's also definitely not.
No.
It's more of a web, right? Like it's a bunch of like interconnected understandings, and that's why again I'm saying like there's so much that I've learned that seems unrelated to red teaming that I've been able to apply. Because knowledge is a web. It's not like this direct. Like another thing I get asked for, because we have a lot of junior consultants, right? Mm-hmm. And the only way to make senior consultants is typically to train juniors. It's very difficult and expensive to hire existing senior consultants. So
I like that model.
Yeah. But,
you just skip that stage.
Yeah. You want to do some of both, but, in order to get senior consultants, often you have to train them, Yeah. And I see a lot of people asking for like, what's the roadmap to learn red teaming? And it's like, well, I don't know. How did I get here? Let's see. Like, go learn.
I made a deal with some random guy, had to sign this contract in blood. Did you do that part yet?
Yeah.
No.
It's like, well, go learn like web programming, I guess, and then like, high performance computing, and then. Like I list like 20 things that are unrelated to red teaming, and then it's like, okay, so because there is no one path, right?
No.
Like there's no one, there's no set of criteria. It's an amalgamation of different disciplines, and so there's like you got to find your own path, which can be daunting for people starting. I remember being quite daunting when I started out, but you get there.
Yeah, you always will. And, sometimes you'll just be pushed into it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You'll be pushed in the deep.
You got a question for me? Usually I let my guests ask me a question.
Oh, I didn't know.
I know.
In the hot
I
seat.
didn't cover that before on the pre-screening stuff.
So where do you think red team is going with the advances in artificial intelligence? Let's keep it hip and current.
I know. Yeah. They so I think a lot of traditional, before we go into like the red teaming stuff, I'll talk about traditional like pen testing stuff. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of traditional pen testing roles will eventually get replaced by AI when it comes to finding different types of vulnerabilities and stuff like that. That doesn't mean I think all of them will be replaced. Mm-hmm. But one of the things, people talk about, how do you like future-proof your career from AI and stuff like that. The cool things about AI is that it can automate a lot of great things, and it can expedite workflows. I think red teamers should just like embrace AI and work with it. I do think it's going to be harder for junior pen testers to get into the career field. In 6 years, it's going to be much harder to be a junior pen tester into the field than it is right now, right? And even now, it's much harder to get into the field as a junior pen tester than it was when even we were first getting into it, I feel, right? And I could be wrong on that. Maybe it's the same difficulty, but I just feel like there's just so many more technologies that you have to learn than what I felt like I had to learn back then, right? Mm-hmm. And but I think it's going to be harder for juniors to be getting into the field in like 6 years because of advancements of AI. The one good thing I think AI is going to do, I think is going to help a lot of blue teaming folks or a lot of defensive security folks. But AI is going to have a difficulty. Eventually we'll be able to do this, and I think it also doing AI like social engineering type stuff where it's a voice that's just taking in input and then trying to manipulate it. I think that will be a future thing with AI.
I think you might be able to even do that now-ish.
You can. Yeah. There's actually a project I know of a company that's developing it, but they're kind of in stealth mode right now. So I'm not I didn't want to talk a whole bunch about that. Yeah. But yes, there are groups that are working on that now.
I've been really impressed actually with this is a slight tangent, but the deep fake stuff is very impressive.
Oh, super dangerous.
And actually, you could probably train a model based off of this podcast alone.
Very much so.
Yeah. Yeah. And get either one of us. So.
Royal has already trained models. He made a motivational talk from YouTube videos that I was giving talks in.
Okay, yes, because we also have been playing with this and have already trained several models for like they did one for me and is it people on my team, but and like our CEO and so that's been very impressive. But sorry.
No. So I definitely I know it's going to go that direction.
Yeah.
The one thing it's not going to take away just right now is being able to do the physical stuff.
That's definitely true. Until the robots take over. But,
that's right. Yeah. Actually, we have some clients that actually have those like automated robots.
Yeah.
The security robots.
I should say until the bipedal robots take over, you're probably fine.
So
it's like you walk up the stairs and it can't get you.
Right. So, that is there's actually a true story around that where it's just like once you're past level 1, like those robots are not effective. So, or you can hide in stairwells. That's a story for a different time though. But I think that's going to be a little while before that comes into play. And I think with the more defensive stuff, with AI coming into play, there's going to be more. The threat is going to move more and more from external outside to insiders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you have compromised individuals inside, or people that are being compromised, or people that are being manipulated that they don't even know they're being manipulated. On that front, right? And then we're talking like small manipulations over time, essentially like grooming someone to do things for you, right? Mm-hmm. Perfect case example, everyone talks about like, employees can be bribed, right? And if you ever do an engagement that requires you to do bribing of an employee, make sure it's not your own money that you're bribing with, because they actually have to go and then sue the employee that took the money and stuff like that. So pro tip.
Good to know.
Yeah. Not a lot of companies are willing to do like bribing tests.
I don't think we've ever done one like
that. But you don't ever bribe someone because they might have a guilty conscience afterwards. Mm-hmm. So, and this goes back to a different set of trainings and stuff like that.
I feel like this is more in play in the government space. I have read Legacy of Ashes, which is like a history of the CIA, which is pretty...
That's a history of their failures.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't paint them in the best picture, if I'm being honest.
It paints them... Oh, man, I'm going to get so many people angry at me for this. Paints them in a realistic picture. How about that?
Okay, yeah. But I do think there's a section in there about making sure people have like the right motivations and how like financial motivations like can be useful, but not always. And,
They talk about
you
mice
want like
there.
Political allegiance more than like financial allegiance.
Yeah, so it's called mice, MICE, and it's ideology is what it is. So it's about turning actors or how to like turn people, right? So you don't bribe them directly with money, right? You go and you say, hey, and this is like the insider threat thing that going back to that point. Hey, I'm looking to build a application that has like one component that's very similar to something they've already worked on at their company. And if you can build it for me, and like I have this timeline, 6 months, and I'll give you, whatever, 100K or whatever, build it in 6 months. But if you can build it in 3 months, I'll give you like 500K. If you can build it in a month, we'll do $1 million, right? Yeah. So then what they do is they actually borrow pieces of code from their employer and just put it in there so they can get that 7-figure payday. Yeah. Right. And that's how you like that.
It's a good approach.
It works really well. I'm not the one that came up with this idea. But it is.
As a programmer, I like to reuse code.
Exactly. Right. And if you have the difference between you getting something done is $900,000, right? You'll be like, well, I could borrow some parts of this. Like, I'm not giving them the application, right? But you're giving like core parts because you don't understand that actually what they're interested in is that particular part, right? So you go and you do that, right? And that's where I think a lot of like threat modeling is going to lead, not into necessarily like that type of threat chain, but moving more towards inside players and stuff like that. So with
insider
AI,
threat's super hard.
It is very difficult, and that's where I think AI is going to push security to like when we think about red teaming and pen testing now. I think that's what it's going to push us more into, right? Into looking at those type of threat vectors instead of the traditional, network pen tests and stuff like that.
So I feel like an LLM might actually also be good at catching this if you're like feeding all your internal chat logs to the LLM and you're like, who is LLMs obviously have a lot of applications in surveillance, I guess, is where my thoughts are as well.
They do.
Like at scale, right?
Yeah.
Whereas before you might
unbelievable scale.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's already been used by our government since 2008. They've had like what we consider LLMs, right? Which is not what they call it. They've been using those on tons of stuff since then. The mass collection stuff, all the stuff that's going to like Utah and other data centers that people don't really talk much about, but they're the same thing. They've been doing the max collection and the analytics on that for over a decade now, and not exclusively in the Utah data center, because that one's hasn't necessarily been built for as long, but with all that data, and they've been using it for surveillance, and now they're just making their tools even better. So
yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I don't quite have, I think, an intuitive sense of the growth curve on the capabilities of LLMs yet. Like, it's not clear to me if we're in an exponential curve, a linear, or like a logarithmic curve where, are these things going to get better at a rate of, Moore's law, like twice as good a year? Or is it more of a logarithmic curve where it'll kind of plateau, in the next few years? So I have a very, it's hard for me to sort of anticipate how it'll affect red teaming until I get more of a sense of what that sort of growth curve or learning curve looks like. Because, going from like ChatGPT 3.5 to 4 is like noticeably better, but not like amazing. It's definitely not, or it doesn't feel like twice as good or anything,
Mm-hmm.
So, although I guess you really need to measure these sorts of things,
right?
But just sort of intuitively,
people might think it's twice as good because it can do pictures.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So, I think that's sort of the wild card is like, what's the actual growth curve on these things, and can they scale them up?
And and will people take advantage of them?
Yeah,
right. Is the other.
I mean, they're useful today, which is great. Like,
right.
I use Copilot all the time.
Right. But I mean, on a red teaming, like our company is going to be developing, AI
custom,
and they're going to, because they've already been saying they've been
honestly.
Doing that for
I mean,
the
it's
last
impressive
few years.
what the general purpose models can already do. Like, if you ask it, like, how do I structure an nmap command to do something, like, it'll probably give it to you.
Yep.
So it's pretty impressive what these general purpose models can do. It's not clear to me. Again, I don't have a lot of things about AI and machine learning seem unintuitive. Because it's not immediately intuitive to me if a tailored model would perform significantly better, at least for like general purpose pen testing tasks and general purpose sort of like red teaming tasks. Because I think you need to have it like you need to feed it all those like Linux books and stuff,
right?
Like, which you might not have in like a tailored sort of like red team model. But if you want to achieve a specific outcome, then obviously you want a tailored model to that. But like if you're like, because we've used ML for a number of different things. So we have a couple of different open source projects. So for example, I think it's called Eyewitness. You can give it screenshots. So you can use like GoWitness or Eyewitness or anything to go out and take like thousands of screenshots, and it will tell you where the login pages are.
Right.
And that's just using classical. This is before all the LLM stuff. It's been out for a few years. And that's very useful. And actually, one of the other super useful ones that Dan, one of my colleagues, developed was old looking. So it'll find old looking websites.
Oh, okay.
Which are usually like unpatched, like PHP my admin boxes or something, And so they're like, obviously there you want a custom built, like tailored model to like your exact goal. But it's pretty impressive that these general purpose models can create nmap commands and write code and also write, a poem in iambic pentameter, so yeah, I just don't, it'll be really interesting to see that growth curve on these general purpose models. Because if we are in an exponential curve, I do think a lot of humans are going to get replaced in pen testing and red teaming.
Yeah.
But if we're not in an exponential curve, if it's logarithmic or linear, then no humans are going away anytime soon. Because certainly today, you can't use these things to replace a human.
No.
They're still very useful, but you definitely can't replace a human. For everything they're useful for and very impressive, and they can do things that I never thought a computer would be able to do, it's still not a human yet. But yeah, so...
Though
anyways,
many companies are trying to replace people with them.
To varying degrees of success.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
So it'd be really interesting to see how that pans out over the next couple of years. But I think
we'll see.
I'm not too worried about it.
You're not like me thinking.
I'm more of a pessimist.
I mean, if you're a pessimist, you'd be thinking like I am, is just that they're going to replace the junior pen testers.
So actually, the research I've seen is the LLMs give the biggest lift to junior employees. So there's
and assisting them, right?
Yes, and assisting.
Yeah, definitely.
So there was a good Harvard study. It wasn't security related. It was like business consulting. But they looked at teams that had LLMs and then LLMs with coaching and then no LLM.
Mm-hmm.
And the LLM, everyone with LLMs outperformed, no one, the people without LLMs. And the people with LLMs in training performed the best, although by only, I think, a slight margin. But the biggest increase was for junior employees, because if you don't know a technology, you can just ask the LLM. In this case, I think they were doing like marketing research or something. But so I do think there is an upside to junior employees for some of this stuff, for some of these LLMs, because it does seem, again, this is all like initial stuff, but it does seem like it can provide quite a bit of lift to more junior employees. Or less experienced people in almost any field, not just security. So I think it depends again on that growth curve and whether or not that pans out. So I don't think it's the end of the world for juniors. The bigger problem for juniors is the rate increases and the lack of easy VC funding to companies. Yeah, because a lot of companies, were employing junior employees were these big companies that had lots of easy access to capital. Yeah. So I think
money's not free anymore.
Yeah. So I think that's had a bigger, again, I don't actually know, and I don't have any data to back this up, but intuitively, anecdotally, I feel like the rate increases have had a bigger impact on junior employees than LLMs or anything. And in the future, LLMs may actually be a boon to more junior employees because it could make it easier to do a lot of this stuff because you don't need to be an expert.
Right.
The LLM is the expertise, and you just need the human for judgment sorts of things. Although, again, I'm not an expert in AI either.
Oh, you're not? I mean, you haven't updated your LinkedIn profile to say you're an expert?
Disclaimer, I'm just a novice. I'm a fan.
Yeah.
Read a thing or two about it.
Hobbyist.
I've played around with the technology. But that's about it. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Only time will tell.
That's right. Time reveals all, right? Mm-hmm. So, well, I appreciate you coming on. Where can people find your stuff online?
I'm on GitHub, Moloch --. So you can find me there. Otherwise, I'm on Twitter, Little Joe Tables, and then I'm also on Mastodon, but I don't remember my Mastodon name. I think I'm at Moloch at InfoSec Exchange. Otherwise, if you go to the Bishop Fox website, I think they have links to my social media accounts on there or something. Yeah. Cool. Also, don't message me.
Yeah. Already letting you know he's not going to respond.
Yeah, I'm not going to respond. So.
He doesn't even respond to my text.
Yeah.
So. Well, thanks for coming on.
Anytime. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for tuning in to Red Team Radio. Don't forget to like this episode, hit subscribe, and follow for more. Craving extra Red Team Radio exclusives? Dive deeper at redteamradio.net and click support for early episode releases and members-only content. Join us twice a month as we continue to unveil the unseen in the Red Team Chronicles. Remain vigilant and do not cease to be curious.